Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Okay, so we are continuing our discussion of the interaction of Jews with general culture, which is one of the reasons why I feel such a personal affinity with the period, because it's, aside from the so-called Golden Age in Spain, which is another story which I personally don't think, I think it's overrated in terms of certain conclusions people take about it. The Renaissance Italy and the so-called Golden Age in Spain were really the two major examples of really extensive Jewish interaction and involvement in general culture before the modern era, and we have a lot to learn from that interaction, both in terms of the path that modern Jews took in this regard, and possible paths not taken, which might actually be revivable. Okay, so last time, let me go back. We looked at these three individuals who were three of the most famous humanists, Renaissance humanists: Marsilio Ficino, Pico della Mirandola, and Guido de Viterbo, all of whom were seeking old wisdom. They were the entire one of the major slogans of Renaissance humanism was to go back to the original and to read things in the original language. It's one of the reasons why, for example, when people don't realize this was the case in 1453, when Constantinople was conquered by the Ottoman Turks, which was considered to be like a very traumatic event for Western Europe. First of all, it meant the end of the Roman Empire. Second of all, it meant that it basically made it very clear that the Ottoman Turkish move or push for jihad was really going to be directed towards Western Europe, which it actually was. And the truth of the matter is that over the next 200 years, the Turks conquered a significant amount and Islamized a significant amount of the Balkans, Bulgaria, Hungary, and tried to take Vienna twice. Had they succeeded at the gates of Vienna, then there's no question that Europe would have been Muslim already, and as opposed to what's going on now, where now the struggle is being carried out in the streets. Anyways, but the other part of that was the fact that lots of very learned Byzantine, or they called themselves Roman, scholars moved west and flooded Western Europe, and what they were able to do was to teach their Catholic counterparts, because they were Orthodox, their Catholic counterparts, to teach them Greek, which they largely didn't know. So now there was this huge jump to try to learn to study the gospel in the original Greek, Aristotle, Plato, all of these in the original languages and not in Latin translation. And within that context, there was a desire. All right, so I'm going to study Greek, so we might as well study Hebrew and know the Bible in its original. And so these people are typical of those who of the leading intellectual lights of the 15th, 16th century, who turned to Jews and asked them to teach them Hebrew and to teach them Tanakh and Talmud less, but certainly Kabbalah in the original. The question is, how do you evaluate that? How do you evaluate that phenomenon in terms of the interaction between Jews and Christians? We'll get to this, as there are really two schools of thought about how this came about. There is the Romantic school, which was expressed and was led by a man whose name was Cecil Roth. Really, in the 50s and 60s, he was considered to be the greatest Jewish historian alive. As a Brit, he was a reader in Jewish history at Oxford, I think. It might be at Cambridge, but I'm not pretty sure it's Oxford. And then later, in the late 60s, he came to Israel and became the first editor of the renewed Encyclopedia Judaica, the big blue one that everybody used to have in their house, which is still, by the way, better than the one that they redid. It is now online, but that's another story. In any event, Um, even though I contributed to the second edition. So I mean, I'm not. It's not one of the things I'm like proudest about. I mean, what I wrote, I'm proud of, but it was not a very successful effort. In any case, um, Roth was. We'll come back to this later, but Roth, like, he was a person who he idolized Italy and he idolized Italian Jewry, and he just was like thrilled that these heroes of intellectual history all loved Jews and they were happy and they're living together and they're hugging and kissing, and or as the former late chief rabbi of Rome once put it, I was once invited by the and this expresses this position very, very nicely. I was once invited by a joint conference of the Jewish teachers of the New York Public Schools and the Italian teachers in the New York Public Schools to speak about the Jewish-Italian interaction. This has got to be like in the late 80s. So I come to the thing, and the guy who introduced me was the chairman of the organization of Italian teachers in the New York Public Schools, and he described an interaction or a meeting, a reception he had with the late Rabbi Elio Toaf, who was the chief rabbi of Rome until he passed away. And now it's my friend Riccardo Di Segni, as saying that Rabbi Toaf said to them when they came and visited him at the Tempio Maggiore, at the great synagogue, and at the edge of the ghetto, people who even in Rome must have been there. Rabbi Toaf said to them very explicitly, Cristiani, ebrei, non c'è una differenza, noi siamo tutti italiani. Jews, Christians, there's really no difference. We're all Italians. And that was sort of like the way that the Roth and an entire school of historians that he trained or went in his path saw this interaction, that this was intellectual meeting of the minds, that the Christians reaching out for the Jews led to sort of mutual respect and awe and close, intimate friendships, and really defied the model of Jewish Christian interaction, with which we're all familiar from like the Crusades or Khmelnytsky or something. Now, the other school, actually the one I belong to, not gainsaying the fact that people work together, they can develop fine and very intimate and close relationships. That school is represented by my teacher, Professor Roberto Bonfil, Ruven Bonfil, who was at first was chief rabbi of Milan and then became a full professor. He's now professor emeritus of Jewish history at Hebrew U. That the situation was much more complicated, in the sense that there were certainly interactions and so on and so forth, but the question is, how did they see each other? So his argument is that that there was no cultural relativism that emerged from the interaction between Humanists and Jews. On the contrary, when you read Pico, or you read Marsilio Ficino a little less, but if you read Egidio de Viterbo, if you read Pico della Mirandola, in their personal writings, they write about their relationships with these Jewish teachers. And they say, I really hope that eventually, from our working together, we'll finally be able to convert these people to Christianity. This was not a case of, I'm okay, you're okay, we're all good together. There certainly was this interreligious divide that was there. Bonfil is even more harsher about this. He basically says, as far as they were concerned, as far as these Christians were concerned, Christianity is superior. Nobody questions the superiority of Christianity, and the Jews are supplying
one second. I'm sorry.
Can I help you? Okay. Then the Jews are supplying a service of giving them Hebrew lessons. Okay, now that's from and the Jews were flattered by the fact that we're needed. On the other hand, as I said, it's complicated. If you take a look at how that it wasn't a two-way street. I mean, it wasn't a one-way street, rather. It was two ways, and the interaction with the Christians actually had a profound impact on the Jews. So, for example, where's this thing here? Okay, so for example, here's a book written by Yochanan Alamano, who was the personal tutor in Hebrew of Ficino and Pico della Mirandola, in which Alamano takes Renaissance principles and Platonic ideas of love and intellectual love and stuff like that, and finds them in the Bible. Okay, so that would seem to be okay. So you're talking about a profound impact of Renaissance culture on a Jewish thinker who was actually a major Jewish thinker at the time. Yes, that's true. But then the question arises, okay, how did he understand that? Okay. In other words, Yochanan Almano, what was his position vis-a-vis the source of his things? Because he's talking about coming from a Christian world, and people still consider, Christianity to be some type of idolatry or, avodah zarah or so on and so forth. So here it's really striking what you find consistently, and I'll show you some other examples. Well, not so much that. I'll stick with Shar Cheshik for a minute. You find an interesting phenomenon. Pretty much consistently, and we already saw it actually, the truth of the matter is, hinted at in the responsum, at the beginning of the responsum of Yehuda Aryeh Modena about music. The argument is that we are not taking anything from the Christians. Basically, our encounter with the Christians has brought us to realize that there were authentic parts of the Jewish tradition that had gotten lost, and we are now restoring it. Now, it really came from us. They stole it, or we lost it. We found it, and now we are sort of like reconverting it back into a Jewish context. And the fact that we can find all kinds of Platonic ideas, for example, confirmed in all kinds of Jewish sources, only confirms the fact that this is basically restorative and not a case of influence. Now, are you going to ask me objectively, is it influence? Yes, influence. But the question, when you look at phenomena, you really have to ask yourself the question, not just where did something come from, but rather how did people understand what they were doing? Because sometimes it works the other way. I'll give you an example. I have a neighbor whose name is Professor Rami Reiner. Very famous from a very famous family. His father was the co-Rosh Yeshiva of Kol Torah together with Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. His brother Hanan is the emeritus professor at Tel Aviv. His other brother Shmuel is the Rosh Yeshiva, one of the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivat. What's it called? No, Hakibutz Dati in Malay Gilboa. Anyways, Rami Reiner is the world's expert on Rabbeinu Tam, the grandson of Rashi, who is more than anyone else responsible for the Tosafist method and the Tosafist revolution, which is based on dialectic. And for many, many decades, it was a given that when you look at the fact that there are methodological similarities between Christian scholasticism in 12th century France, Peter Abelard, if the name rings a bell, and the Tosafist method of learning Gemara, they say, well, the Jews got it from the Goy. Okay. The truth of the matter is, Chaim Soloveitchik and Rami Reiner, in his big book on Rabbeinu Tam, recently published, say, no, sometimes Jews come up with stuff on their own. We're not totally dependent and just passive sponges from the outside world. Sometimes certain circumstances arise in parallel without any kind of definite dependence. So you have to. So there are three really issues: is there influence from the outside on Judaism? Yeah, it could be yes, could be no. In the case of Platonic ideas, it's definitely yes. In the case of the dialectic method of learning Gemara, a la Tosfos, the answer is no. But then the more important question is, at which point, how do they understand it, and what do they do with the influence? Inevitably, what happens is, even if you were influenced from the outside, you take something from the outside and you convert it, and you acclimatize it, and you make it Jewish. Okay. How many times have we heard, for example, that this is an important methodological point because it comes up all the time. How many times have we How many times have we heard it said that Haredim walk around in 16th century or 17th century Polish noble robes? And the Streimel comes from the Goyim, so therefore it's puzzle. Okay. That's true. But it suffers from what a historian at Brandeis named David Hackett Fisher calls the genetic fallacy, that everything is to be evaluated only on the basis of its source, or its origins. What did the Haredim do? What did Jews do with this uniform that the nobles stopped wearing and Jews continued to or adopted? So first of all, they didn't wear it while the Shlachta, while the Polish nobles were wearing them. Number one, so there's a certain distance involved. But more importantly, anybody know how Hasidim button their shirts? Anybody? You ever pay attention how you button your shirts? So my shirt, which is I bought it from Amazon, okay, has the buttons are on the right hand side. And the cloth, the holes are on the left hand side. So the left is on top of the right. That's a classic. Women's blouses, are the other way. Okay. Did you know that Hasidim restructure their both their shirts and their kapatas so that the buttons are on the left hand side and the holes are on the right hand side? Now, you know what? The reason for that is, there were actually two reasons for that. One reason is that you dafka don't button your shirts the way that, or coats, the way that the Goyim do. But more than that, because Kabbalistically, the left is bad and the right is good. So you have to wear clothes where the right is dominant over the left. So basically, all right. So yeah, the kapot, the original kapot and Shriel may very well have been derived from Polish noble fashion, but it's been transformed and adapted to Jewish needs and becomes a genuinely Jewish thing. I mean, it's like and the same thing, by the way. I'm not going to go on to this. This was those of you who may have known the late Velvel Pasternak, the great Jewish musicologist. This was his major argument. He says music is adaptive, and you can turn something which is X into something totally different, and that's what's happening here. So the question is, what happened, and also how did people understand themselves? So that's what happened in Shara Cheshek. I'm doing, I learned about this stuff, but I found it in the Torah, so therefore it's Jewish. Sometimes there are things which are not there, but nevertheless, there were things that were done. What's the word? Apologetically. So one of the things that Jews never did, there's a wonderful book by my teacher, Yosef Chaim Yerushalmi, called Zachor, about Jewish attitudes towards writing history. And he points out in the book, I was actually in the seminar where the book was gestated, actually. In the book, he argues that Jews don't write history books. They write a lot about historiosophy. In other words, what's the meaning of history and how does God work in history? And that you can find in Meforshim and in all kinds of tracts. But generally, to write, he did this and he did that and da-da-da, Jews don't do that. There were only 2 or 3 major outbursts of Jewish historical writing from ancient times until the modern era, when Jewish studies took off, and there's a whole big discussion of why. So one of these outbursts was in the 16th century, and one of the people who was a leading factor in this sort of interest in historiography was a cousin actually of Salomone Rossi. His name was Azaria Bonaiuto de Rossi, Azaria Minha Adumim, and he wrote a book called Sefer Ma'orei Naim at the instance of Egidio de Viterbo that we just saw. He said, what happened was there is a text in the Apocrypha which is called the letter of. It's actually relevant to Hanukkah, called the Letter of Aristeas. This is a book that was not allowed. It was written around the time of the Maccabees. Was not allowed into the canon of the Tanakh, and it describes how Ptolemy Philadelphus in the early 3rd century created the Great Library of Alexandria, which unfortunately was later destroyed, and commissioned Jews to come and translate the Bible into Greek in what became the Septuagint. The Chazal have their own version of the story. And that's what when I think it was Egidio de Viterbo asked Caesarea, who was his buddy, what do you know about this book? And he never heard of it. So he goes back and he translates the book into Hebrew, and that leads him into a whole historical exploration in response to the challenge by the non-Jews. So you do have some stuff the Jews are doing as a sort of anything you can do, I can do better, which, by the way, is part of the underlying motif of the Golden Age in Spain. But I said that's another discussion. So you have genuine stuff where you think you find genuine Jewish things, or you said that I'm actually have to create something in order to we don't look stupid. Somewhere in the middle, a lot more neutral, is the fact that the Christians are asking the Jews to teach them Hebrew, which is all very well and good, but that requires knowing Hebrew. Teaching Hebrew requires knowing Hebrew grammar and Hebrew syntax and Hebrew this and Hebrew that. Jews were, outside of Spanish Jewry, Jews were never good at that. Ashkenazim were terrible. I mean, Ashkenazim were just awful at this. I mean, at composition and things like that. So there was a historian, a linguist at the exact same time, whose name is Eliyahu Levita. He called himself Eliyahu Tishby. He's also wrote in Yiddish, by the way. He's one of the earlier Yiddish writers. And the demand on him and his fellows to teach Hebrew brought about a re-examination and a re-evaluation of the attitude of the average Jew, the average intellectual at least, to Hebrew, and to the creation of, based on Radak and the famous grammarians, and to create books like this. This is the Sefer HaTishbi, which is a book of Hebrew grammar for the use of Jews, because Jews figured, wow, they want to know Hebrew, we should better know Hebrew well also. And that actually led to a renaissance of Hebrew writing, including, I don't know if I brought you examples, but including the development and the cultivation of Hebrew writing, letter writing, which used to be an art, epistolary, as a sign of the intelligent person. So here's a volume called Igrot Yehudei Italia. I have 3 volumes actually like that of collections, in which are letters that were finely honed letters, which were very highly florid, with openings and closings. And remember in school they taught us salutations and closings and the body of the letter and all the stuff you have to know how to do. So that was considered the sign of the intelligent Jewish intellectual, and here was a situation in which the challenge from the outside, or the demand from the outside, actually led to a genuine and credible revival of something which had been dormant within the Jewish community, and developed Hebrew on its own terms. Sefer HaTishbi has a Nachleden, has a very interesting after history, or afterlife, because it becomes a major work which gets the Jewish Haskalah going, and the Hebraism revival in the 19th century. In fact, Shar Cheshek less, but the 2 of the major areas of secular or semi-secular Jewish intellectual activity in the age of emancipation and enlightenment were historiography, it's beginning Jewish studies in the early 19th century, and the cultivation of Hebrew in other sectors. And it was Italian Jewry and what was created by these Jews who were learning with the Chavrusa, with these Christians, left behind, which actually sparked or became the basis for further activity. So the long-term impact of this interaction is still it was really quite significant. Now,
excuse me,
yeah,
who taught the church Hebrew? Because obviously they read the Nevi'im and they tried to decipher it into their favor. So
that's it. That's what I said earlier. They got Jews to teach them.
But how long back? Because you're talking about the 1500s.
Well, look, you have like this. You have the first Catholic involvement in learning Hebrew goes back to the late 12th century, as part of the efforts by a Dominican friar, a very senior Dominican friar named Raimundus de Peñaforte, to teach his people Hebrew in order to be able to use the Bible and Chazal, actually the Gemara, as a basis for missionary work. Basically, we would say in Hebrew, okay, so it was from that effort actually that arose the two major pushes against the Gemara in the 13th century. The first being the trial of the Talmud in 1240, which was undertaken by a Meshummah who was one of his de Peñaforte's people, whose name was Nicholas Donin, and the other was the Ramban's disputation, which they marshaled Jewish sources based in Hebrew to prove that actually Chazal were crypto Christians, and that you can convert, you can actually prove the truths of Christianity from Chazal, which means that it's. I know this is going to sound like perverse, but this is what they argued. Since Chazal, it's like this. Since Chazal lived at the time of Jesus, so they knew that Jesus was God, and they knew that he was Messiah. But the Jews are arrogant, and the Jews are stubborn, so they. What's the word? They repressed it. However, we all know that the more you repress something, the more it's going to come out. And so, in other words, these guys actually formulated before Freud the idea of the Freudian slip. So if you go through Chazal properly, you'll find all kinds of places where Chazal slipped up, and actually properly understood, many things that Chazal say can prove the truth of Christianity. Once that's proven, that means that if a Jew really wants to be a real Jew, what was the argument? The argument was that Jews understand the Torah Shebichtav, the written law through the oral law, and that's why we can't be Christians. So now they're going to say, but the oral law is Christian, so therefore, if you don't become a Christian, then you are basically betraying the Torah Shebal Peh, and you're basically a heretic to your own religion. Now, it's true. This is krum as a pretzel. I mean, that is no question. But this was the argument. So that was stage number one for where Hebrew literacy, which was continued to be cultivated by the Dominicans, was used as a polemical device. What you have over here is something a little bit more academic. The idea being that you can't really understand any kind of ancient text in translation. Tradikare tradukare. If you translate, you basically betray. So we want to go and study things in their original language. So we're going to study the gospel in Greek. We're going to study Aristotle in Greek. We're going to study Plato in Greek. I mean, they would have studied the ancient Egyptian writings in hieroglyphics, except that it was until Champollion they used the Rosetta Stone to decipher ancient Egyptian. That wasn't accessible, and so they want to study Hebrew and Aramaic, and so they took Jewish teachers to teach them that. So it's it was a little, as I said, it was a little bit more academic, but they still approached those studies with the profound conviction that the Bible, that the Hebrew Bible is still a work that not presumes, prefigures Christianity. So in other words, if we know the Hebrew, we'll even be more effective at proving that Judaism really morphs into Christianity, and that the roots of Christianity can be proven from the Hebrew Bible. So that was just, yeah.
So I'm saying, so it's not like the German Bible criticism.
No. These are all from Goyim. These are very from Goyim. By the way, that's one of the things that I was just on all of these. I'm part of some very, very, very senior. I'm not trying to brag; it's frustrating. Senior dialogue group since already May when we were fighting about the reform. Remember the reform? And and part of the culture and the cultural war between sort of like radical secularism and Judaism that takes place at the higher levels of Israeli society and in the media comes up all the time. And one of the things that it's like crazy that keeps coming up is that many of the cultural heroes of the anti-religious secularists in Israel were really from Goyim. I mean, I can't say it any more boldly. I mean, Sir Isaac Newton wrote more commentaries on the Bible than he wrote books about physics. Blaise Pascal was a Meshuggah from Catholic. I mean, these people did not see any contradiction between their academic engagements and their faith. And so the last thing they were going to do is to say that to deny the historicity of the Bible or anything like that. By the way, the point of the Bible criticism only gets off the ground if you throw God out of the equation. That's why, to a certain degree, it's a game, because you're doing it with one hand tied behind the neck, on the assumption that people did this and there's no God, and I use this system of literary criticism. What will I come up with? But like, as I said, that's only part of the story. I mean, when my friend now, as it happens, the highly mechanical the Bible criticism is basically collapsed into that. Now they say every other word is another source, and it gets crazy. But and it becomes dogma. One of my friend Professor Josh Berman, who, if you haven't had him in Ra'anana, you should have him in Ra'anana, because he's just a wonderful speaker and a wonderful person. He's always running into this, using academic tools to present a holistic approach to the Bible per se. And he ends up getting dismissed as some Orthodox rabbi because of the dogma of Wellhausian biblical criticism. So that's a whole nother ballgame. Anyways, it is not. It is so let's keep going. So things did not just stay in terms of language. You have Jews doing stuff that was really amazing that Jews had never done. So one of the I'm going to give you a bunch of examples of Jews doing stuff and really bridging worlds, both to the benefit of the Christian world and to the benefit of the Jewish world. So the first person I want to introduce to is a man whose name was Yehuda Somo Mishar Aryeh. His name was Leo Porta Leone. Porta means a gate. Leone is lion. Yehuda Somo Porta Leone. Porta Leones were a very famous rabbinic family. I call your attention to this book by a cousin of his. It's called Sefer Shiltei HaGiburim, which I keep in my office. He is a contemporary, actually, of this other Yehuda, and this is a book in which he goes through and using Renaissance themes, advocates, tries to figure out how the Beis HaMikdash was built and how it functioned. There's a beautiful discussion there about music in the Beis HaMikdash in light of contemporary musicological theory. Yehuda Somo's thing, however, was drama. Jews, I mean, when you think about Broadway, it's hard to believe. Drama was created. First of all, it was a pagan thing. Don't forget, Chazal didn't let you go to theater because it was always pagan, right? You used to start off the play by giving by sacrificing something to Athena or to this one, to that one. It was not a play. Jews went, but it wasn't a place. You didn't get Mafter Yonah if you went. They knew what you were going to the theater. Christian theater was religious. All Christian theater, it still happens every March or so. The World Jewish Congress and the ADL get all bent out of shape over passion plays, especially the one in Oberammergau, which was a very, very, very famous anti-Jewish, not anti-Semitic, but anti-Jewish passion play. But the passion play is really one part of a larger phenomenon where drama was used initially to teach Bible stories and to teach morals and to teach Christian dogma. And in the Renaissance, it sort of becomes a little bit more. I'm nervous about using the word secularized because secularism really doesn't exist yet. But in general, it becomes a legitimate. It becomes expansive as a form of entertainment, but it's always didactic. Yuda Samo was the first Jewish playwright. So, for example, first of all, he's a theorist. He wrote one of the most famous books on direction and production of plays, Quattro dialoghi in materia di rappresentazione scenica, 4 dialogues on the subject of scenic in the sense of putting on the stage representation, and it was very popular among everybody, Jews, Christians, everybody. I mean, if I remember correctly, there were those who argued that, in fact, even Shakespeare had seen the book and used it. Okay. He also wrote comedies. Don't forget, tragedies means a bad ending. Comedy means a happy ending, but not necessarily something which is funny. He wrote Italian plays. He wrote Italian plays for the general public. Here, this is a comedy called 3840x2160, 3 Sisters, and the first Hebrew language comedy called Tzachut B'dichuta de Kiddushin, the pure comedy of Kiddushin. It was written in Hebrew, it was performed in Hebrew, and it's a comedy of errors based on a really very typical sort of situation that Jews found themselves in, surrounding couples wanting to get married, and what happens if you give a gift, and if you give an engagement present, can that be considered Kiddushin? But he does it very lightly. But what's striking is, okay, the play, as I said, was in Hebrew for a Jewish audience, which means that the level of Hebrew literacy among Italian Jews, and we know this from other places, was very high, both among men and among many, many women. These letters that I told you about, that these 3 volumes of letters, part of the, we'll see what the Jewish university that was established in Italy was teaching, you were expected to be able to understand and to read and to compose in Hebrew. You were also supposed to be expected to in Italian. One of the I forget what it's called. There's a game among Paitanim, among Mizrahi Paitanim, where one person, Rav Chaim Sabato likes to do this at Malay Dumim, where one person starts and he improvises a line, and then the next person picks up the last syllable of that line and then improvises something else. And I always keep the rhyme scheme. I just don't remember what it's called right now. Something similar was going on among Italian Jews in these same circles, where they would write alternately Hebrew and Italian poems with the same the same scansion, in other words, the same measures, the same the same meter, and also the same rhyme scheme, which is pretty cool. Anyways, and these plays were put on. We know, especially in Mantova, there was a famous Jewish theater, especially when it came to the Purim Shpilim, and Purim Shpils really find their beginning as part of formal comedies put on in Hebrew in the 16th century. Okay, it wasn't just the theater. Jews got into dance. Okay, this is a person, we don't know his full name. We know his name was Guglielmo Ibreo, William the Hebrew. So his name was probably Benjamin Zev the Hebrew. He wrote the book about formal classical dance called Trattato dell'arte di ballo, the tract on the art of dance. Okay, now here we start getting into the dicey stuff, because now the picture on the left is an illumination from a non-Jewish manuscript showing people dancing. Okay, see there's a woman, and so on. You'll automatically see something which is going to, raise eyebrows. But these are Christians. One of the forms of dance, you hold hands. What happened? Those people grew up in Ben Akiva, Chevra Morevet, and Rikudim Uravim, and what's that sign? So it seems that here you have a phenomenon among Italian Jews where dance is part of the accepted cultural life of the Jews. How do I know? So I'm going to do something really, really cruel because it's 1241. We're going to read together a takana, an ordinance by the senior Ashkenazi Fruma Rav of Mantova, one of the greatest rabbis of the age, Rabbi Yehuda Mintz. And I'm going to leave you hanging until next time to try to parse it. Okay. What you have here is an ordinance in 1507 that was ordained by Rabbi Yehuda Mintz in Padova for the entire Veneto. Okay. And it was signed on not by the communities. This is not the Balabatim. This was signed on by every major rabbinic figure in the entire Venetian Terra Firma. Okay. So here is the text. Hold on to your chairs. Gam gazarnu, we have decreed, al ha'anashim, regarding all the men, shelo yirkedu im anashim hanisuot, that men can't dance with married women that are not their wives. Shum zachar im nekeva nisua, without exception, milvad b'mei Purim. On Purim, you can dance with somebody else's wife. Omnam, true. Imapnuyot yuchlu lirkod. They can dance with the non-married women. Ubitnai, on the condition, she was charim melubashim malbush acher lamala me'ajapone, that they wear an upper jacket above their japone. Be'ofen, in a way, shebeit torfa yeh mechuseh lefachot. I don't know if you remember from your studies of Shakespeare, in other words, you have to have a cod piece. A cod piece is like a jock strap. You have to be covered. You have to be covered. You can't just wear hose. V'chol mi sheyesh biyado koach, yesh koach biyado limchot, and anybody who has the ability to protest the violation of this ordinance should protest. Notice there's no cherem here, okay, where there is other places. No, there's no, what's the word? There's no fines imposed. And if somebody violates this, yavar al das Yehudis. He's in violation of das Yehudis. Everybody knows das Moshe, das Yehudis were ksubis, but das Moshe is basic tznius. Das Yehudis is sort of like extraordinary tznius. And by the way, this is tznius for who? Men. So this paragraph's got a lot to stuff, but just to give you a sense of what we're talking about in terms of whatever. See this here. Here's the guy. The jacket is a japone. Okay. Here he's wearing hose, and if you look very carefully underneath the jacket, there's like a balloon. That's what you need to wear. Which means if they had to declare that they can't just wear hose, it means that that's what was going on. Nobody wanted to know where the Moyle signed his name. So, and this is all signed as approved by, I'm telling you, the most important, aside from Marikola, the most important Ashkenazi posek. And by the way, Ashkenazim were known as the chnyuks of the world. You know, if you read some of the local things, wow, these Germans are such fruma. What do we need them for? I mean, you know, the Italians are so, fancy free. These are not Italiani. These are not Jews from Rome. This is in Padova, where, according to many people, Yiddish was invented. So, and where, by the way, and it was such a Torah center that Jews from Poland who studied Torah would come and do their first stage as rabbis in the Veneto, sort of like out of town. Okay, so I'll leave you hanging, and we will. Sorry about that, and we will continue this next time. We have a class on Tuesday. Okay, good. All right. So in the meantime, Chanukah Sameach, and you can roll this around in your head for a week.
Thank you very much, and
Okay.
I'm waiting with anticipation now to next week. Who knows? But please, a note to anyone in the shir: don't try this at home.
Oh, but okay, Beseder. All right. So have a Chanukah Sameach.
Thank you very, very much.